was also maybe feedback from the last gentleman. It seemed that when you had the proposed regulations by the FAA for the 55-pound and under, one of the bullets that looked like it would be the most challenging technically to me was the ability to see and avoid aircraft. Because I know, like in the defense world, they're working on developing the technology for full sense and avoid and flying in clusters of aircraft. But that's going to be pretty hard for a commercial guy who maybe wants to film a movie to be able to have the technology to sense and avoid aircraft.
Yeah, I agree with you, and there's been quite a bit about sense and avoid technology, and probably John, any of these three gentlemen here probably can speak more to the technology than I can, but I completely agree with you. That's a tough one.
I just comment that, I think sense and avoid is the big problem going forward. The FAA is not regulating, it's trying to regulate around the problem by creating safety zones, distances from people, and I think the Amazon proposal, while it's wonderful, but autonomous operations is something that probably scares the FAA more than anything that we know of at the moment.
Yeah, I could just add one of the reasons that the proposal currently and the 333 approvals require visual line of sight is, of course, allowing the operator to be that see and avoid. Sense and avoid's another level, and the FAA, like night operations and some other categories, has decided they need more data before they can move forward with proposed regulations for that. So that's how they're sort of managing it. Moving into the future, they know it's going to be beyond line of sight. They know they got to tackle either segregating airspace, or if you're in cooperative airspace, some technology that allows for sense and avoid. ADS-B, if you've heard of that technology, is promising. But there are still hurdles. You know, these aircraft operate typically very slow. They're very small. They're hard to see, and mixing that in with traffic that's much bigger is problematic.
So this sense and avoid is a bit of a problem. A UAV carrying, a UAS carrying a capable sense and avoid system needs about 300 pounds to carry at present, and most of them won't. And the concern I have is the lost link. So if a 50-pound aircraft has a lost link, then it flies outside of line of sight. And if you have a lost link, is it reckless flying? It may be say, well, it broke. It's now reckless. It's no longer reckless flying. Now we've got a 55-pound bird flying, and aircraft, the large aircraft, Part 25s, are not designed to ingest a 55-pound bird.
That issue is what the FAA worries a lot about. The lost link, runaway aircraft is something that we've spent a lot of time on the certification level with them and the Section 333, and it's a risk that they are basically accepting. Right now, the rules require that you have a GPS return to your established location, but that GPS link can break too. And so the runaway is a real problem. And when you get up above 55 pounds, the FAA's answer is you're going to have to get an airworthiness certificate from us.
Is that one of the reasons why CNN is going to be operating with a tether? Because of the fact that
Mr. Tether is right next to me.
Right. I spoke directly with the representatives of CNN, and because they're operating within urban dense environments, so they won't be jammed or what have you. So no Wi-Fi.
Yeah, the decision making on the FAA part from the FAA is much easier if they can truncate the problem of a flyway. I have to say though, a lot of the approvals currently are for systems that have some layers of redundancy. So the FAA isn't just fully accepting the risk. They are looking at the system functionality, with a return to home function, or if you lose GPS and link, automatically land flight termination points, that sort of thing. So it's not completely wide open. But tethering, we just got the first 333 approval for an operator to tether outside of the CNN thing. And it makes the safety case very easy. It's that radius plus a buffer, and you're done. You don't have to really worry about the flyaway. I have to say though, I think all the operators that are currently operating are providing data monthly back to the FAA on how many events they have, and if they're honest, we'll see how often this occurs. Some operators do an RF check of the area. Some are required to do, the movie guys in particular, do a dry run because, if they get Brad and Angelina on the set and then the unmanned aircraft goes wacko, they've lost $1 million that day. So they have to have a system that is reliable and works. And they put a lot of redundancy in their systems, additional links, redundant links, that sort of thing, multiple batteries, a lot of things to make sure it works properly. So I think we'll find out how frequently that happens, and if it happens, how frequently it creates an issue.
Jeez. All right, let's just keep going backwards then. There.
Quick question to one. You mentioned the advantage of the micro engine over the batteries from the point of view of performance. But what about safety in case of a crash and the fuel could be a source of ignition? Could you comment on that?
Yeah, so our hybrid technology is called a dual power technology. It's a combination of gasoline, internal combustion engine, and a small battery. So from that perspective, the dual power technology can use one or the other. So for example, if the internal combustion engine fails in flight, you can still land the vehicle with the battery. It's one of the few technologies on drones that actually allows for that type of failure mode to occur. On the second part, what happens if the vehicle does crash, comes down? It could be a flying bomb, essentially. We're looking at different technologies where you can inject chemicals into the fuel to make it inert, basically non-flammable. So those type of technologies will be safety protocols built on top of the existing system.
Good questions. Okay, back here.
This is for John Brown, probably. Do you see the traditional pilot certification requirement for commercial use to go away at some point, or think that that guideline is good?
Yeah, so they've already stepped down from commercial to private and then to sport pilot. I don't think they'll go any lower than that. There's no other certificate they can go to that's lower. So again, the requirement to have a certificate driven by the two things I talked about, primarily national security. And it would be too much effort for them to set up a separate vetting system prior to the final rule coming out. I think when the final rule comes out, you'll end up with some form, whether it remains, you have to keep in mind, it's a proposal, whether the final ends up where it is now with pilot requirements being an operator, a written test, and then a certificate issued to the operator, remains to be seen. We don't know if they'll end up that way. I suspect there'll be some form of certificate that will have to be issued by FAA regardless when the final rule comes out. I think all operators will have to have some kind of certificate.
Testing out on the UAV, not
Yeah.
kind of starting with a real plane.
Yeah, the FAA realizes that it doesn't, flying a Cessna 150 provides great airspace knowledge, but doesn't provide any benefit in terms of how you handle an unmanned aircraft. So they recognize that, but they have nothing else to issue, right? It's the only vehicle, the only certificate they can issue for the reasons I stated.
Let's go way to the back.
Thank you. Probably for Professor Farber or anybody else in Canada. Narrow market, agriculture, private property, low, slow, line of sight. What kind of obstacles do you see putting something in the air that will work, not just watch? Say you go from a 55-pound to a 250-pound to a 500-pound. And so what kind of obstacles do you see?
Well, I think, first of all, depend on where, right, what jurisdiction you're in. And as soon as you go above 55 pounds total, then you're outside of, even with, depending on what these small UAS rules ultimately look like, you wouldn't be within that bracket, and that's probably, a ways off. So now you're looking at essentially, trying to get an airworthiness certificate. So you're sort of caught, in the middle there if you're under 55 pounds. But I would also just suggest that you keep your eye on what's going on. I assume, if you're not talking about Massachusetts, you want to just keep your eye on what's going on legislatively. There are, in a lot of these jurisdictions, exceptions that run the gamut with all different kinds of industries, and that's one of them you see a lot is monitoring crops and refineries, et cetera. But let me pass this down.
The FAA has issued a Section 333 for 25-pound Yamaha aircraft under Section 333. And so that is an option that's going forward right now. Agricultural, in my opinion, the agricultural work is the easiest market and the biggest market. If you define agriculture as mining, forestry, any kind of surveying over land is a tremendous market. We have clients that are in that market with fixed wing and rotorcraft, and it's a big deal. When you get up to 500 pounds, I think that's a ways off.
Yeah, again, it's just dependent on the safety case. So there is no limit on Section 333. Just the safety case gets harder to develop as you get bigger. And particularly if you're carrying, aerial application, for instance, of pesticides, et cetera, now you've got multiple risks involved. As you get bigger, you're going to have bigger safety buffers. You're going to have more redundant systems on board. You have to manage the aircraft in terms of failure. And you're going to have to demonstrate that to FAA. So there's no hard limit. It just the hill gets steeper as you get bigger.
All right, one last question. I've got two guys that got to get on a plane, and then I think the other speakers will be kind of sticking around. So right here, real quick.
Thanks to the whole board, but everything we've talked about in this up to now has been remotely piloted vehicles. The application I think that Bill was talking about with an unmanned aircraft traveling up and down Mass Pike to do data collection on its own is an autonomous situation. My guess is you wouldn't have a dedicated person sitting there flying the thing back and forth in a chase car. What do you look at as far as the potential for the opportunities to develop those more autonomous systems where the operations are completely handled by the equipment itself? And then where would that, if someone was pursuing that, are there places in the test centers right now where you can do those sort of operations, or is that a too far down the road sort of scenario?
Well, so the FAA, if I could start, the FAA has already has one of the Pathfinder programs is with the railroad, which will provide exactly that. It's going to end up being semi-autonomous, if not autonomous. Does worry the FAA, but they know it's coming. They've got to deal with it somehow. So they've authorized this Pathfinder agreement to allow them to collect data on how it might be done and to evaluate different technologies to see how you can layer enough redundancy on it. At the end of the day, the airplanes that fly around today are built around the principle that any catastrophic event should be a 10 to the minus 9 probability or less. So very, very, very remote events if it's catastrophic. I think eventually we'll have that same approach taken to unmanned aircraft operation. It'll become more traditional and it'll be a more straightforward path. But the technology is changing so fast, if they don't make it a performance-based regulation, the technology will outstrip it by the time it's final, and they'll have to start another regulation. So I think all of that, night ops, beyond visual line of sight, fully autonomous, linked to a particular path or area, all of those things, I think particularly at low altitudes where you're not integrating with other aircraft, are going to happen much, much faster than anybody anticipated back in 2002 when we were struggling over whether this was a reality or not.
All right, that's great. We'll thank our panel. I have a small gift for each of you, very small, from the organization. And then Frank will have a few closing comments. So thank you.